Which of these statements is true? In our forests, people find employment and recreation. Spruce budworm is a natural pest of some of our forests, as natural a component as the trees themselves. Pesticides have a history of success. Aerial spraying makes people nervous. In an average year, there will be some 13 million visits to our provincial parks. That the BC Forest Service and BC Parks work together on an aerial spray project in a provincial park. Paul Lake Provincial Park is hidden in the hills 24 kilometers northeast of Kamloops. On the drive up, visitors pass through the dry Ponderosa pine countryside, through grazing lands, into the transitional forest of Douglas fir and aspen. The forest keeps the campsites cool, even in the heat of a Kamloops summer, making the park a favorite destination for locals, the Sun and Suds crowd in July and August. Paul Lake is also a popular stop for travelers en route along the Trans-Canada and Yellowhead highways. The park offers a great deal to visitors. Over 100 campsites, a very large picnic area with over 450 meters of developed beach, and a boat launch. During the summer, a naturalist provides visitor programs in the amphitheater and leads hikes along the nature trails. A favorite stroll for visitors is up to the peak of Gibraltar Rock for a spectacular panorama of the lake, the surrounding hills, and the green forest. Every year, 80,000 visitors enjoy Paul Lake Provincial Park. In the 25 years since its establishment, over $2 million have been invested in providing visitors with a high-quality park experience. In 1985, it was apparent to provincial and federal forestry staff that population trends for the western spruce budworm were pointing towards an outbreak. The area of greatest potential for damage was the forests of the Kamloops region, including Paul Lake Park. Western spruce budworm is about 1/3 the length of its scientific name, Corystonura occidentalis. It is a native of western forests with a demonstrated preference for Douglas fir. It is the larval stage that is the troublemaker. In large numbers, larvae will consume most or all of a tree's new growth over their 5 to 7 week feeding period. In severe outbreaks, trees may be killed or deformed. For forest managers, an infestation produces smaller, lower quality timber, as trees experience reduced growth during the years of heavy attacks. Tops may be deformed or die off. The result, less timber and lower values. For the parks, the problem is different but equally serious. The damaged and dead trees are unattractive, and it's the physical beauty of a park that draws visitors. It's the younger Douglas fir that are most heavily attacked by the rain of caterpillars. A serious loss, for these trees both provide shade and privacy as they screen the campsites. The sheer numbers of insects during an infestation is also a detraction from the park experience, as they litter the park. Let's go up to Paul Lake and watch the budworms graze, a rarely heard suggestion. Damaged and dead trees are more than unattractive. In a crowded campground, they can be a hazard. And not just the park is affected. Local residents with cottages on Paul Lake were rightly concerned about public health, about the potential for forest fires, and about the damage to property values. Local businesses stood to suffer, since many depend, in part, on revenue from visitors attracted to the area by the park. Confronted with a budworm problem, forestry and parks began to evaluate alternatives. From a park perspective, one clear alternative was to do nothing. Parks preserve natural ecosystems, and budworms are a part of the interior Douglas fir ecosystem. If the outbreak had occurred in a large park, such as Wells Gray, then the hands-off alternative might well have been adopted. But park management policy does call for control where park values are at serious risk or where adjacent commercial forests are threatened. In other words, 402-hectare Paul Lake Park was too important and the potential for serious damage too high for the problem to be ignored. With the decision made by park staff, the BC Forest Service was contacted, and staff from both agencies got together to review options available and to decide upon a suitable treatment. The choice of controlling agent was Bacillus thuringiensis, a bacterium usually referred to as BT. BT was chosen for many reasons. BT is safe. It's been used in the U.S. since the late 1930s and in British Columbia since 1960. It has been inhaled, injected, scratched on, and fed to rats, mice, swine, rabbits, dogs, pheasants, trout, and man. The result? This broad sampling of the animal kingdom is still around and none the worse for the experience. BT is specific. That is to say, it attacks only a narrow group of insects. Most other insects, honeybees for example, are not affected by BT. And BT is a natural enemy of larvae, destroying the gut of insects that eat it. Death usually comes in a few days or weeks. For these reasons, we could perhaps describe BT as one of Mother Nature's little pesticides. A past drawback of BT was its lesser effectiveness in comparison with some other pesticides. But newer, improved formulations and application techniques have increased its success rate. With BT chosen as the appropriate agent for controlling the damage to Paul Lake Park, the project had only just begun. Because of the complexity of interagency projects, the careful planning required, and the many steps involved, we will take you through the stages leading up to and beyond the application of BT in Paul Lake Provincial Park. First of all, a project team was assembled which included regional forests pest management staff, regional provincial park staff, and outside contractors. The team identified two goals. The short-term goal was to save as much of the new foliage as possible. The long-term goal was to offer protection until budworm populations collapsed naturally. Much of the technical planning was the responsibility of the Forest Service pest management staff. The first step was the organization of a monitoring program to identify population densities within the park. Sample plots were established to monitor the effect of the treatment. And high-priority areas were identified, areas such as campgrounds, picnic areas, and nature trails. Control programs cost money. Preliminary surveying was completed the previous year to permit time for planning and budget requirements to be identified. Application to the Ministry of Environment and Parks for the pesticide use permit was made well in advance, as these complex permits are reviewed by the Interdepartmental Pesticide Review Committee, and several months may be required to complete this process. A word that appeared again and again in the planning process was windows. The windows referred to were not the ones that committee members stare out of. Rather, they were the narrow openings of time that had to be adhered to for the project to be successful. Timing was critical in terms of budworm larval development. BT is only effective if applied early in the development of larvae, but no later than the third and fourth instars. Timing of the spray was critical in terms of the time of day also. It must be done in the early morning, before thermal heating and excessive evaporation causes the air to rise, or during the brief period after sundown, when the sun's heating stops and there's still enough light to fly. And timing with regard to weather conditions was equally critical. The spray must be deposited on dry needles during times when there is no wind to blow the fine droplets away from the target area. 3 critical timing windows. As a result of these requirements, budgeting of staff time by all groups was crucial to ensure that enough manpower would be available at the right time. Equipment needed was identified, including aircraft equipped with the proper spray system to deliver the optimum number of small droplets evenly over the forest. This preliminary phase of the project, where budget, manpower, and equipment needs were identified in response to the project goals, was absolutely critical to the success of the undertaking. One of the earliest organizational requirements was the allocation of responsibilities. The project coordinator ensured that all team members knew their responsibilities, and there were many: public relations, equipment, monitoring, preparing the spray, and support services were all allocated by agency. The person in charge of equipment arranged and confirmed an adequate supply of insecticide, checked on mixing equipment, and gathered portable radios for communication between the mixing site and the people at the spray site. The person responsible for monitoring assembled a crew to do advanced surveys on insect development, from which a timetable for spraying could be established. The date for spraying was mid-June, fully 10 months after the need for action was identified. This date represented the culmination of planning for manpower, equipment, and budgets that the budworm larvae, in the course of their larval development, had unintentionally made themselves. Final preparations began. Corner markers and navigation points were identified and set in place. Layouts for cards to monitor spray coverage were established. Access restrictions to the site and marshalling points were arranged and confirmed, and public information and advisory measures were implemented. The last few days before spraying were busy ones. The spraying equipment was calibrated to ensure that it met operational requirements. Flow rates were checked on the ground and in the air to confirm that the correct volume would be used. The test run over a line of cards confirmed spray pattern, droplet characteristics, and swath width. The mixing equipment was inspected and the concentration calculated. The pilot and project coordinator flew over the treatment area for a final inspection and rehearsal. The day before the spraying ended with the completion of the field work, final inspection of all the physical requirements, and a meeting of the entire project team to once again review responsibilities and schedules. The project coordinator was on site early to evaluate weather conditions. Precipitation, humidity, wind, and temperature, as well as the local weather forecast, were all factors in deciding to go or no go. Mixing and loading began only with the project coordinator's okay. The pilot made a final review of an accurate map and aerial photo of the area, with swath lines clearly identified. Radio-equipped ground observers monitored the spraying to ensure that coverage was even and consistent, that buffer areas were not sprayed, and that local weather conditions did not change sufficiently to affect the project. The project, of course, did not finish with the landing of the aircraft or with the on-site crew collecting and inspecting the spray deposit cards. A few days later, the assessment stage began as monitoring crews continued on-site larval sampling surveys. Their work confirmed a decline in budworm population in the park compared to the untreated area. Analysis by the project team confirmed that it had been a qualified success. Equally importantly, the project was thoroughly documented, in part by this presentation, to ensure that future projects would benefit from the lessons learned. On the positive side, perhaps the most valuable lesson was that agencies whose goals are different can still work together to protect a shared resource. Projects such as this one require close communication and cooperation so that agencies can address each other's concerns and by working together can eliminate conflicts. The public played a prominent role. Their awareness and support was, and always will be, a prerequisite to success. Within the project team, communication is the essential ingredient for success. If everyone is kept fully informed and is provided with the opportunity to work as a team, then the inevitable snafus cease to be inevitable. The Paul Lake project worked because everyone knew their job. Overlaps and gaps were minimized. The project coordinator had the authority necessary to make the crucial decisions and to ensure that all team members were taking care of their responsibilities. The Paul Lake project met most of its short-term goals. Some of the operational lessons learned were that closer attention to weather and larval development are critical, and that the experience gained will contribute to the increased success of future projects. Like all resource management projects, the Paul Lake project will never really end. Monitoring the budworm will continue, both inside and outside of the park, in order to protect the forest resource. There will be a continued need for cooperation and communication between agencies, and from time to time, the need for joint operations. Both the BC Forest Service and BC Parks are sure that the Paul Lake experience is useful as a demonstration of what can be accomplished when people work together.